Studio audience, that's the right word? No, it's not studio, TV land audience.
Deshaun.
All right. Yes. Good evening, everyone. We are about to call this meeting to order. In compliance with the Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551, I call this meeting of the Manor Independent School District to order on.
March 3rd at 5:01 PM.
Let the record show that a quorum is present. This meeting has been duly called and notices of this meeting have been posted in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. Now we will go into closed session. The board will now adjourn into executive session at
5:02 PM.
pursuant to the following sections of the Texas Open Meetings Act, 551.074, 551.071, and 551.129. Thank you. All right, everyone, we are back. And, we will, huh? Again. We're opening up at what time?
6:07.
Okay, we're gonna start with the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to the Texas state, under God, one and indivisible. Thank you. All right, someone, a volunteer for the vision statement. It could be anybody.
Manor ISD is the best district in Texas will provide an equitable education for all scholars, graduate them ready to become leaders like you.
Thank you, trustee Patterson. Do I have a volunteer for the mission statement?
Collectively as a community, Manor ISD provides equitable resources, a safe learning environment, and high-quality educational services for all scholars to successfully achieve and reach their full potential.
Thank you, trustee Rodriguez Barnett. We will move on to public forum. We don't have any signed up. No. All right. We can continue. Information items 7.1.
Trustees, Mr. Santiago and I are going to take you through a discussion of the 25-26 budget to start with. So Mr. Santiago and I will be kind of trading off, I think, here and there. Our clicker is over there, so I guess we'll just, I don't know, do a hook 'em every time? I think you want to go for it.
Right, basically.
So, but the first couple of slides are really just for me to discuss a little bit about how we did this draft budget, what are our guiding principles. Mr. Santiago is then going to go through a lot of the numbers, and it's going to come back to me, and we'll talk about some of the more specifics. And of course, anytime there are questions for trustees, please ask. We have a set of the presentation on the budget in front of you, somewhere in these piles of paper. So feel free, if you don't have one, just let us know so you can look along as we go. Just a reminder, and all I did is I took our district goals and really just tried to hone in them on something that could help guide us. As you can see up there, maintain a safe school and work environment, of course, is the number one priority. Ensure all students are on grade level math and reading, 3rd, 5th, and 8th grade. Ensure all students graduate from high school, college, career, and military ready, which of course, if you're not on grade level, you wouldn't be able to necessarily do some of those. So that covers our high schools. But of course, when we build a balanced budget, our goal is to accomplish the mission. And so I really want to focus on, we took a look at the budget and we rebuilt it with those things in mind. And so how we started, if you go forward one, some guiding principles as we looked at how are we going to accomplish these things. We talked about, well, what can we do in this environment where funding from the state is so uncertain? And we had 4 guiding principles. The first was to invest in the skills of our employees. The second was to simplify the mission for our staff and our teachers and our students. The third is to support programs and services that have a deep, wide, positive impact on our goals. You know, just a kind of idea of both quality and quantity. And then finally, focus on needs, not wants. There are a lot of things we want, but we really got to focus on what we need to accomplish our goals. And that kind of helps clarify some for staff about why this, not that. And so going forward, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Santiago. He's going to give us, I think, a quick primer on the state funding system, which was created over 30 years. We're going to talk about it in like 5 minutes. Go.
So it is as complicated as you see it there. I'm not going to get that detailed. I just want for y'all to have an overview of how other primary functions or the sources where we get our funding from. Those elements that affect us primarily. In this case, funding for Texas public schools depends on local resources, so tax property primarily. About 90% of our budget is made up of local taxes. About 11% of that, of our operating budget is made up of the state funding that we received from the TEA. The primary source of that is the Foundation School Fund, which is TEA's mechanism to ensure that school districts receive an equitable amount regardless of property wealth uh, per student based on the same local tax effort. The other source of the state funding is your permanent school fund. This is another allotment that the school districts receive aside from their foundation school funding. This other part is funded on a per capita basis. That's established by TEA, actually by the Education Commissioner, based on the funds available. So they'll determine a per capita amount every year, and that amount is different every year. Last year it was about 620 per capita. The previous year is like 400. So it varies quite differently. So how we try to project for next year is try to go halfway, but not to try to project as high on that part. Other sources of local revenues come from ticket sales, any interest earnings, any rental fees. Just a while ago, we were talking with our financial advisor about interest rates. We see over those for the upcoming days. We don't see much increase or much change as far as interest rates. So our budget is based on a very conservative amount of interest earnings that's built into this first preliminary proposal. Another source of funding that we get on top of what we generate locally and state funding is your supplemental funding that comes in the form of federal grants. This is Title I as the ESSA grant, IDIBs, or special ed Perkins funds. All of those total to about 4 million, 4.5 million, somewhere there. And that's supplemental funding to our local funding that we provide and that we receive also from the TEA. Another source of funding is through student activities. This is raised through fundraising activities or other donations. This is not part of the operating. Then we get to the foundation school program. You always think of the money that every school district have to operate. Think about it as a bucket. Bucket right to my right hand side would be the ideal scenario, right, for every school district where it's dollar for every dollar. That's not the case, right? If we were to be in that case, for every dollar that we would raise local effort, we would also receive one from the state, but that's not the case. The case of the middle bucket would be kind of like your Chapter 48 school districts that are less property wealth, and they receive or generate less property taxes, but receive more state funding. Manor ISD, I consider it to be right here at this level because we are close to the edge of the bucket. We are borderline recapture. So our property taxes make up about 90% of the revenue that we operate with. State funding is only 10% of that. So if you go back to the previous, what's helping us to stay borderline right here is our ADA. The other part that we ought to consider when we talk about property tax is how much we grow per year, local values. Over the previous years, the last 2 years, 22 and 23, we were growing at an average rate of 26% property growth. This last year, that dropped to 5%, 5.7%. So we continue to grow, but not at the pace that we were about 2 years ago. Okay. So that and also the level of ADA that we have is helping us stay right under the recapture value. Next slide. Oh, I forgot to say, the previous slide did say the basic allotment hasn't been changed since 2019, so it's still 6,130. And the state funding is based on ADA minutes, not a student enrollment. So we need to make a distinction when we talk about revenue projections for the upcoming year. In order for a school district to receive 100% of the funding per student, a student must be here present 100% of the time. In order for that person to generate 6,130, that's the basic allotment. But if that student is absent and does not receive the total instructions that are required, they only receive part of that funding. So attendance is critical. And we're not funding an enrollment, we are funding it based on that average daily attendance. So it's a refined ADA that we are funded for by. And that's what the state uses to fund it, to fund school districts. The WADA is used on tier 2 level, and I can explain that when we get further into this slide. But that's used to determine the tier 2, the second level of the per student funding, which is based on wealth per student. So if we can go to the next slide. Here we go to the tier 1 and tier 2. The first level of state of the funding is based on the T2 value. So the previous slide said that we were funded based on the state controller value, not the local value. Okay? So we have to keep in mind that the state controller also does its own estimates of its local value. Whereas the appraisal district also does its own value on its own estimates, but those are based on actual tax rolls, the actual information that we receive. And that's what we operate on. We operate on local, not on state controller estimates.
I have a question.
Yes.
Moises. So now that you were talking about the Travis County appraisal districts and everything, I know for the first time ever, we have elected officials representing the Travis County appraisal district. How do you see that impacting us in a good or negative way? Or what do you see that we need to do to be proactive in these new leadership roles that will affect us locally immediately?
Well, you are required to have representation, local board representation in the appraisal district board. So
yeah.
I guess anything that would benefit us locally here, that person or that representative there is able to push forward for our district. Based on previous experience in my former school districts, that person was always there overseeing what the appraisal district was doing as results to in reference to appraisals, whether those were on schedule. We were having a serious situation where appraisals were not done in a timely manner, so values were outdated as compared to market values. So those are the kind of things that this representative can look for, and maybe yeah.
The reason I'm saying is that I just want to be proactive in these new elected leadership roles that we can like track and see. It's just barely the first year, but I don't want to, if there's anything that we need to keep an eye on, the roles or whatever. I mean, since it's really the first year, and that's going to impact us directly. I'm just.
One of the things that you might do want to be on the lookout for is what they call the map report. It's released during, I believe it's September or October. That's the one that the appraisal district sends to the state controller, and every appraisal district must pass that map test. So based on whatever's included in that, they will update our tax roll in December. So we as the school districts need to look for that report during that time to make sure that that coincides with the levy that we are taxing during our current year based on the same time period.
Now, I remembered about another question. So, and I don't know, I don't think I remember seeing, maybe I did, in one of the slides. Since we're talking about property taxes, local and tax appraisal district, what is our percentage of collection for property taxes? I don't know, you said that lower or tax is lower.
Right, so right now we are currently about 98.3, 98.2 somewhere, based on the January 31st report. I anticipate, and on this proposal, I'm going based off 98.25 to just be a little conservative, although by the end of the year, we could be a little bit higher. So I just want to be conservative with that.
I like your conservativeness.
It always helps us. It always helps us.
Yeah. Thank you.
But we are more or less about 98.2, 98.3%. Okay. So, can you go back to the previous slide? Yeah, let me just touch up on this one right here. This one was a major, played a major role in the later, when we're talking about the golden pennies and the copper pennies. The golden pennies are pennies that a school district can tax on top of the maximum compressed rate. The maximum compressed rate, right here, says the level of growth of a T2 value determines the level of maximum compression. So what happened in House Bill 3 in 2019, the state wanted to provide more tax incentives to taxpayers. Therefore, they passed this tax compression bill. What this does is when your property value, T2 value, grows greater than 2%, then it generates a tax compression, meaning that your M&O is going to be shrink. It's going to be compressed above a 2%. We were, based on the January 31st preliminary value, that value grew by 5.7%. Therefore, the compression was about 2 cents, which is what we're going to see in the next slide. So when that compression hits your M&O shrinks, therefore you have less tax revenue to collect. But the other side of that is that the state makes up for that loss with state funding. So it's one or the other.
Sure, I just want to point out, just because our governor keeps putting out there a statement that public education got $6 billion. Public education got $6 billion to make up for the compression of the tax rate, which made net revenue zero.
Yeah.
So just when you see that talking point, that's what he's doing. He's willfully confusing, in my opinion, those two numbers. So yeah, it's kind of true. You get $6 billion more is going to education, but that's not true that any revenue went into the classroom. Zero. So just that's what's connected to this conversation.
Yeah. This maybe benefits taxpayers. It's insane. So any golden pennies do not generate recapture, and we already have our golden pennies on top of our maximum compressed rate. Now, we were to pass a penny right above our 8 cents, then we begin to generate recapture at a rate of at least $500,000 per penny that we were to tax above the 8 golden.
How many golden pennies was the Vader pass?
Three. Yes.
Yeah, so
We
we
did
have,
not generate recapture.
we have all 8 golden pennies
Yes.
accounted for now. So you do have 9 cents of tax wealth, taxing authority still, but each penny is going to lose almost 50 to 60% of its value.
You've already used 8 pennies.
Gold pennies, correct?
Yes, we already. And we have up to 17 copper pennies.
Yeah, but you don't want to.
You don't want to go there. Yeah. But those would be subject to recapture, okay? So, next. These are preliminary budget assumptions. This is what we are using to estimate our revenue for the next year. It is based on a state controller T2 value of 11.7 billion, which was the one that was released in January. The estimated in the previous year, well, there was a growth of 5.17%, which was 12.3% over the previous year. At that rate, it is calculating a decrease of 0.2 cents in the MCR. And the effect to that, our tax rate, is a decrease of the same amount. So when you see that grow in that T2 value, you also see that compression in the MCR, which in turn affects our M&O tax rate.
This is interesting. We will do a tax rate. You have to set the tax rate in September, right?
In August.
Yeah, August, September, and so August. But you will automatically, based on these numbers, have to lower the tax rate. And these numbers, we should always caution you, will change over the next 3 months.
Yes.
So when we come back, people see different numbers up here. That's not us. That's because the property values are getting more exact. Who's releasing values?
Yes. Okay.
The state?
Yes.
Yes.
So there's 2 critical dates in the year for tax entities. It's your April, when the appraisal district releases the preliminary certified value, and then July, when they release the certified value. We are going to adopt our budget based on our estimates of what we received in April. So these numbers could change depending on what the official district gives to us in April. Right now, I'm working on estimates based on the changes that we see, the different categories of the tax roll. I'm looking at some projections to more or less estimate what that move is gonna look like. But that's still not gonna, it's gonna get us somewhere close to, but we are gonna be dependent on what the July value is gonna be, because that's gonna be our final one where that we have to adopt our budget. If that comes higher than what we budgeted for, then that's less revenue. If it's the opposite, if it comes lower, then we have a little bit more revenue to work with, or we can also estimate that we are could have a potential cushion in there to work with. Great. So based on that 5.17% estimated increase, we are looking at an estimated M&O rate, maintenance and operations of 0.69 cents. The attendance that we are using currently, our ADA is 8,872, and our attendance is at 92.7%. We are using a 9,222 because we have been growing, not at a fast pace, but our enrollment has been increasing. It's not declining; it's the same. So we're just enough to keep recapture low. So that's our ADA that we're and projecting for the following year. If our ADA drops below 230, again, recapture kicks in. So we must ensure that we keep our ADA, we do not lose enrollment, that our attendances stay high, at least above 92.7%, because when we begin to drop below that number, then recapture begins to kick in at a rate of the same amount of basic allotment that we receive. So if ADA drops by 1, our basic allotment is 1,630. So we just lost 6,130, and just multiply by the number of ADA that we lose. Make sense? Okay. If y'all have any questions, let me know. And next slide.
Do you project recapture, and you probably this year? Like I know last year, no, you don't. Last year, it was last year that we had our first ever recapture.
Yes.
And it was over 10 million.
It was over 10 million, and properties increased by more than 30%. Last year, about 23. Previous year to that was like 30 point something. So yes, we were subject to recapture for money.
This partnership that we're about to enter, is that going to affect us at all, or does it at all?
Well, they are going to pay us 6% of the of our services, what it costs to operate our facilities. So 6% of what that costs. So in some way, it will generate a little bit of revenue.
And just to clarify, what I was asking is what partnership were you talking about?
Right, yeah.
1882.
Yes.
So I guess a better way to put it, those student numbers are still our students. They're still our
Yes,
students.
they're
Right,
still
that's really what the base of my question was.
Yeah.
Is that gonna affect our numbers over here?
They are still our students. We'll still be able to count them, and plus we are going to be able to bill them for 6% of the services. Personnel, they're going to be under payroll, so they're not going to be on our. Any other questions before I get into this? No.
Has there been any issue with any federal funds being frozen?
Yeah, I asked that question. A good question.
So yes, there's always that concern. Just last week we received, we were anticipating some of the roll forward from Type 1 funds to be higher than previous year, or they were low. Whatever's happening at the federal level, yes, it is going to affect us. But also, if we do not spend funds, if we as a district return more, well, we should expect to receive less. That's what the state's saying, hey, you're not using your funds, so why are you returning it? So it's always best that we spend whatever federal funds that we receive and not send anything more. So until the time that happens, our entitlements are increase. There could be a possibility that the entitlements could be reduced, but those are based on those kids that are eligible for that.
Ms. Cortez asked me earlier today, so I'll just tell you now the answer. She asked me if some districts had seen their entitlements frozen. Mr. Santiago and his team drew down the funds very quickly into our accounts to expend them so that they couldn't get frozen. So they can't stop you from expending them, but they can stop them from being transferred into your accounts. And so we were notified ahead of time. So far, we managed to draw down the money, so it didn't impact us yet.
But other districts I've heard have been impacted, me personally.
Yeah, and I believe that the main programs that were frozen are those that benefit other countries, where the funding goes externally to other countries, but not the Title Ones and those ones. But who knows? Anything could happen. But yeah, we were on the lookout when that occurred. We drew down. We were only allowed to draw down based on what we had actually sold, not what we have not spent, because it's based on a system on reimbursement. Okay, so let's go to the operating revenues. I have several columns right here, and you all have that document right there, so y'all can follow through. The first column that you have there is the current revised budget. Still not amended. It's the one that we're operating. Revenues currently are at 96.6 million. Column B is what I anticipate those would be at the end of June. The reason why you see a decrease is because mainly this number right here under federal revenue. Now that's not the same federal revenue that we're talking about over here. Right now, our discussion was based on Title I funds and SI and IDEA helps. This right here is a portion of the federal funds that goes into our operating, which is for indirect costs, administrative services. Last year, we were charging our ESSER fund a certain percentage of the actual expenses of indirect costs that went into operations, and it was built into the budget. Well, the way this budget was prepared is anticipation that there was going to be that revenue the following year. Well, ESSER funds are no longer in existence. We don't have any more ESSER funds, so we have less revenue to account for at the end of the year. The other part that's keyed in right there for that number is SHARS. SHARS Medicaid reimbursements. We have those students that generate Medicaid reimbursements because they are eligible to receive those services through special ed services. We budgeted more than 2 million. There has been legislation going back and forth in SHARS Medicaid. Ratios have been changed for the last 2 years. At this point, we are required to pay about 30,000 something for an audit that occurred in 2017. And so, yeah, I'm pretty sure y'all have heard about that, right? So that was the part that we had to pay. So that amount has reduced. And so I wouldn't be conservative because I don't even know what that number is going to look like for next year.
To be clear for everybody out there in TV land, the audit we're talking about was an audit of the state of Texas.
Yes, an audit.
And then they passed on the cost on districts.
Yes.
Which is the money. It had nothing to do with the Manor ISD.
So the state budget will be known in May and June. State budget will be known in May or June. State budget for what they're going to send to school districts.
Well, that's an ongoing discussion. So
they don't have to have their budget done by law, by a certain time.
They can go into special session.
If they go into special session, that's a result.
Yeah.
Theoretically, June. Yeah. And the governor, once it gets to him, he can sit on it for how many days before he will sign it. So we don't know for sure until he signs it. They may decide to kick the can down the road. They can always go back to special session in July. Causes all kinds of headaches. Because we're one of the few businesses that has to make a budget when you know what the rules are.
Yeah.
I know, that's good.
So we have another workshop.
Yes.
If,
This is our first one.
well, and I think the answer to your question, it depends on what happens. there have been years where we have a really good idea, we pass the budget, no need to come back. And then we do an amendment later on just to make the adjustment on the fine number. If there's a major change, then we'll have to talk about options. You can pass, this happens, there's this budget, and this happens, but we'll have some options about how we want to approach it.
And depending on how the legislator turns out, we might have to have multiple fall budget workshops. Cause you just don't know which way we're gonna go. Huh?
As long as there's more money.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So this one is based on current legislation, okay? We're
Yeah,
not
and I
anticipating
figured, yeah.
rapid.
Well, that's important to note. This budget is based on no new
Correct.
revenue. Because right now, we have not been given any revenue by the state.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best way to approach our budget, right? Because there's nothing coming in.
And so, column B, C right there, it's what my, final budget amendment could look like. I have about, 90% of a cushion in there just for any anticipated cost that could arise. Column D is the difference between what we are proposing for the 25-26 school year. So we are proposing for the next year, a 95.6 million budget based on those assumptions that we saw previously. Okay, we should say decrease of at least a 1.5% increase, sorry about that, 1.4 million additional revenues. Okay, so current legislation, okay, so anything could change. That number could be changed by anything that legislature proposes and becomes law in September 1st. It could also change based on the certified values that we receive from the appraisal district, or also the summer teams. Okay. So for right now, that's a preliminary conservative number. Okay. So that's the amount of revenues that I have anticipated for the following year. And for the next 2 years, the reason why I'm doing this is mainly for our financial advisor here presently in the back. He's too busy working on his computer.
Okay.
Don, they needed projections to see more or less where we're headed in the upcoming years as far as revenue projections, fund balance estimates, cash flow needs. So I'm assuming right now we're looking at about 1.5% increase. So this one's are about a 1.5, less than a 1, about a 2% increase. And that's a conservative increase on property values. So less than a 5% increase every year. Follow. Slide, please. This is the expenditure side of the budget. Again, we are currently operating with a 112.7 million budget. We have still not amended the one that we amended back in October. I anticipate by the end of the year, we could be around this figure. So the final proposed budget doesn't change much. I have a cushion in there just for anything that could arise. But main thing to look at right here is this number right here. We are shrinking our budget by 17 million. That's about, I'm missing a column right here, but that's 15% of the operating budget, the current operating budget. That's a decrease of 10.3% in personnel costs, salaries. It's a decrease of 5.1 million in contracted services. It's a decrease of 633,000 in general supplies. That's a decrease of 313,000 in travel and other miscellaneous costs. And capital outlay purchases, a decrease of 666,000 for a total of 17 million decrease to the operating budget. Any questions? So the proposed budget for the 25-26 school year is say 95.7 million.
Which is a balanced
And so
budget.
forth. It is a balanced budget. Based on
I
the
can't
revenue
hear
that we
you.
have.
Can
I
you
thought I
say
was
it
speaking
louder?
up.
It is a balanced budget, I'll say it.
It is, our projected, our conservative projection is 94, 2,888 on the previous slide. So we're
Can you go back to the previous?
in the,
91.
okay. Gotcha,
This one right here is the.
Gotcha. Gotcha, thank you. So what kind of budget is it?
The balance, sir.
Oh,
It's a balance.
Okay. I'll make sure you heard that, sir.
yes.
I love it.
Okay.
I just want to ask a question. Am I looking at a balanced budget?
Yes, you are. Let's go to the next slide so we can see that. No, I think there's some,
Well, talk about why it's important
why it's important.
to have a balanced budget
Well,
during this political time.
Well, I think that's kind of a me thing, just to kind of go back and think about this, the issues we're facing financially, and you can pick a point in history where it came from. I'm not gonna go back in history, but the fact of the matter is, we were faced with, financial issues. And as a board, everybody in this room has done their job to get us to a point where we can have a balanced budget. The reality is, our costs have gone up by 22% now, according to the state comptroller, since 2019, and our revenues and the basic allotment have gone up 0. We cannot afford to operate schools like we used to. It's just, that's gone. Unless this legislature has a complete turnaround, which I don't see happening, it's gone. And so in order for our children to have community control and for our children to have what they need to be on grade level, be college career ready, we have to change the way we budget. So this is the budget we built to accomplish that mission. I'm not gonna say that we aren't gonna take a hit in that mission. You can't cut 15% of your budget and not take a hit somewhere. But we have a plan that we'll talk a little bit about later about how we're going to approach this problem that has been given to us. And I do not believe it's insurmountable. I believe that this is a challenge that we can take on and we can accomplish this mission. It's not gonna be easy, but this is the first step. It's just putting us on the pathway to financial stability from now into the future. And it's a big step. 2 years ago when I came here, I said it's gonna take us a couple of years to get there, because I don't think the district could survive ripping it all off at once. This was always the plan to get to this point that we're gonna do the last bit right here. And so this is what's been done, and I commend everybody for the work that you've done and the support you've given in whatever capacity it is to get us here. It's a huge, huge step. And I know it's a huge step for our financial advisor back there also, because he's the one that's helping guiding us to the future to continue on this pathway of financial health. And so can you go back to the one with the functions on there? So I do want to take a moment for you all to get a chance to look at this. So in districts, we have a function code that divvies up where the cuts come from, the different functions in the district. So you can actually see where it came, and it came from nearly every single spot in the entire district. Not equally, but equitably in order to accomplish our mission. So that's where you see all those different cuts, and you can see the percentage of variance across all different areas. I want to talk a little bit about those numbers you see on the left. This is something I have said before. Some of you may remember almost a year ago, I said it. We still do have too much money spent in administration. This budget actually takes us to the point where we'll get a high score from TEA for our ratio of administrative expenditures to the campus expenditures. So this budget actually takes us the rest of the way that we've been trying to get to where we should be in that balance between the two. And I say that because you need some administration to be able to run things, but you should have a good balance between the two. And that's what those numbers are. That 9.16% is within the range that TEA puts out there as the right ratio to have. And so I want to point that out as well. And if you're wondering, the standard is 11%. And we'll be under that by 2%, which gives us a pretty good score. And you'll see that in the first rating when that comes around next time. And I'll let you get back to it, Melissa.
Oh, that's okay. Was there another slide to this previous to this one? Okay, we can go back to this one. Okay, no, to the other, right. Okay. So the, I'm gonna start from that way, this way over here. So the budget, right here is sorted by function, as Dr. Sormani was, indicating. The first, five are mainly, related to instruction. Instruction, you have instruction, then you have your resources, media, staff development, all of those campus, expenditures, which includes salaries, contracted services, general supplies, everything, but by the different functions. And then you have your counseling department, social services, health services, transportation 34, food service. This is not the fund, the food nutrition fund. It's what some meals that we pay out of our loan. And then you have your extracurricular, which is your athletics, general administration, it's this line right here. So part of the admin ratio right here is a combination of your function 21 and your 41. That's what makes up your admin portion of the ratio, which is the numerator of that calculation. And then you have your 51 operations, security, data processing, technology, and PIMS, and then all of the other debt service. And as you can see, there's no chapter 49 payments because right now we don't generate any. But then you have your total revised budget that we're currently operating with, 112.7 million. This is where we could end up at the end of June. This would be my final proposed budget amendment. And this one is the proposal for 26, which is an increase, a decrease of 15% of the current revised budget. The one that's taken the hardest hit is your instruction by 11.1.
Well, I don't say it that way. It's the largest.
It's the largest.
You see, some of those take 60%, 50% as a percentage.
As a percentage.
It's all relative.
Yes,
What it is.
and so the size of it. And so these ratios right here, this is what as of the 23-24 audited report. So that's a final number, 12.62. Based on this column right there of final estimates, this would be my estimated for 24-25. And based on the proposed budget over there, this would be my 24-25. So you can see that decrease of 1.5% over the previous year, right under the standard, which is what TEA says we should be based on our enrollment at 10,000. That could help us generate some first rating points.
Are we really at a solid 10,000? Because I know this year we went to that range. Is that solid? Could we did back in the 9,000?
Yeah, like 10,040 something.
46. It's been pretty steady since January. We tend to lose a few students at the very, very end, but I think we will stay above 10,000.
10,040.
10,040.
So I'm thinking of the 1882. We lose some kids.
It's definitely a concern for that, and trying to, if we do lose students because of that, to recapture them someplace else. We do have anyone out there, we do have seat space different places, so we can accommodate you. But definitely a concern.
So y'all have put together a plan to capture that.
Well, yeah, we have some cushion in our budget. That's what it's looking. South. Go ahead, Melissa.
Next slide, please. Okay. So what this is the change in the fund balance. It is your revenues minus the expenditures, which is this line right there that says change in fund balance. That first number, 29.9 million, that's what the audited fund balance was back in August 30th, 2024. So that's a true number. What the fund balance was. Back then, we had 3.2 months reserves in operations. by the end of this fiscal year, if our revenues, well, our revenues are gonna be under our actual expenditures. So there could be a change in the fund balance by 17 or 18 million, which would decrease our ending fund balance to from 29.9 to 11.9, which to answer your question earlier about why it's important to adopt a balanced budget, this is the reason why. Because we're only gonna have 1 month of operations. Which is another reason why we are gonna need to borrow money to operate in the upcoming months. That's only 39 days to operate. But also reduces your constraint progress measure, the one that you all use to measure your fund balance as a percent of the budget, from 26.5 to 10.6%. That's the reason why we need to adopt a balanced budget.
So, when do you, what, I know last year was towards the fall that, where you went out for a loan. And is this the same timing that you anticipate us going out for a loan or before? Cause I know
No,
it's gonna be before.
it's gonna be, have to
Yeah,
be.
that's what I-
Yes,
You go, I think the graphic on the next slide will help.
yeah, the next, okay, can I just explain the previous one before I go to this? Can you go back to this? Okay, so the proposed budget right here, to answer your question, whether we were adopting a balanced budget, is that number right there. If that, as long as that number is 0, it's a balanced budget, because your revenues match your expenses. But this does not help our fund balance. It only stops the leak, puts a Band-Aid, but does not help us unless we incur any savings or any unanticipated revenues. That would help us. Our new revenue will help us with that number right there. But if we,
It's important to add just my budget
Yes.
practice for, especially for new trustees. In the budget he's showing you is every expenditure. Think about it as like a do not exceed that.
Right.
So we will only go down over the course, which is the idea is we will always end up with a surplus unless we amend the budget if we choose to. So the idea is if we put every little thing you could possibly expend in there, you never spend everything because you've got vacancies in this large. The things you find that you don't need. So you will always go under that number unless some disaster happens.
Mhm.
The other thing is of course, remember, we didn't account for any new revenue we get from the state. So we have an opportunity to use that, and we'll talk about how to use that revenue later, but that's all going back into your fund balance. And then last of all, we talked about selling some assets. None of that's in this budget either. We're pretending like that didn't happen or won't happen, even though we talked about it.
So in this budget, I know, I'm sure you're including the payments of all the debt that we have, like for the bond.
no,
No?
No.
That's
Uh,
different.
that's your INS. This is only maintenance and operations.
And then I have a question on the items, but whenever.
The only thing that we have here related to debt is the interest that we pay on loans. That's the only thing.
Yeah.
So the 29 million from last summer was enough to cover 3 months.
Yes, and
So,
then that's the reason why we had to go in October and ask for a loan just to help us.
and so this, end of this year, we're only gonna have 1 month,
1.5.
It's anticipated about 1.5.
1.5.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll be asking for a bigger loan.
Yes. Okay. Definitely. So the way you read this is this number, you carry it over here, it's just like zigzag.
Yeah.
So for next year, you can see the revenue projection from an increase from the previous year, 2.1, and I just decrease it by assuming if we were to increase next year our revenues by 2%, well, if we're gonna do something to the fund balance, we need to continue decreasing. Otherwise, we're not gonna be able to put anything back into the fund balance. It's just gonna be a wash. Okay, so that's the reason why for the following year, if we continue that progression of readjusting our budgets to actual expenses, maybe by 5%, we could put back into fund balance about a 6.1%. If you continue again the following year, if your revenues increase by 1.75%, and again you decrease by a lesser percent, you're gonna put back about 10.9 million. So if you continue that progression, you're gonna get eventually to where you need to be. You ought to be no less than 4 months of operations by June. If you don't have 4 months of operations in June, then you're gonna need to borrow money, which we don't want to do that. Okay? So we want to get to a point where you have a sustainable fund balance. And that's our goal. Any
Just
questions?
following this model, about how long do you think that would take?
I'm sorry?
Just following this model, about how many,
3 years.
and that would cover the gap, the whole gap?
If we do these adjustments, yes. And that's a conservative projection of revenues. So that could be a little bit higher, or this one could be less, or it depends. And
This is assuming that we operate on a balanced budget for the next 3 years as well.
this is if you adopt a balanced budget in this year, and the following year, you adopt a surplus budget. And the following year, you adopt a surplus budget.
Okay.
If you adopt only balanced budgets, you're not gonna do
We're
anything
never
to the
gonna-
fund balance.
We're gonna have to
It's just a
borrow
wash.
every year.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, remember that this
If you have
assumes,
savings,
this
yes.
assumes no new revenue from the state. This assumes no sale of assets.
Yep.
Because we're adopting a very conservative approach.
Yeah.
So if those things do come through, then we're gonna have to
That's
adjust all
gonna-
this.
This is gonna push this way. Yeah.
So there are ways we can accelerate this.
Yes.
But this is as is right now,
Right,
the
that's right.
situation that we're in right
Correct.
That's the time that it took my previous school district to get out of their situation. Yeah.
So let's do better.
Boy says we can do better.
As long as I get your support.
That's right.
Next slide. Okay, so this is the constraint progress measure. Took it back to 21-22. This is the year that we had a real good year. We put back into fund balance more than 4 million. The goal, of course, the board, I guess it's the superintendent's goal, or is it board's goal?
Straight progress measure that the board has
The
set
board
forth.
adopts for you, for the superintendent. So I just carried it to the previous years, 16.4 for 60 90 days operations. So back in 21-22, the difference between the goal and the actual was almost 30%. 22-23, as you can see, it begins to decrease. And that's because your expenditures begin to rise and your revenues to decrease. So it begins to eat that fund balance that you're holding there. We're currently right here. We're inverse. The delta is negative. So because we have a deficit budget, we adopted a deficit budget, and right here by adopting a balanced budget, it's going to help improve that number right there. So it's going to increase it little by little. Based on the previous projections that you saw on the previous slide, that's how our CPM goal would improve every year, until we get to a point where we have a fund balance that's sustainable and we don't have to grow. And like Dr. Samani said, any new revenues, any savings could increase or accelerate that pressure line.
It's important, I think, to add that we wouldn't only not borrow, but we would also, while it's sitting in that fund balance, there's opportunities to actually gain some revenue from.
Yes, that's another plan. We could do that, but that would require the restriction of those funds that be set aside only for that purpose, and I think that requires board actions. But yeah, we can set those funds aside and investment in a long-term high earnings. Any next slide? I think we're almost done. So
Did Dr. Thomas come off of mute?
I'm sorry.
I
No,
thought I
she's
heard
there.
Dr.
She's
Thomas
there.
come. No, come off mute or
Oh.
say something. I thought I heard her.
Yeah, I said something early. I said something earlier, so I'm just waiting.
Okay, and
Should just wait. So some of the major highlights related to the budget and cash flows. We are now at the point that we can pay off our loan, which our financial advisor is here. We have a board action item to present to you to pay off the loan early. That would save the district almost $100,000 in interest costs, which is good. That was our goal, and we are there to the point of getting close to achieve that. To maintain sufficient cash flow for operations, after July the 1st, we'll need to borrow approximately 30 million. So that's what I'm anticipating right now, that we would have to borrow to be able to operate the upcoming months until new revenue starts to flow in early December. This time, I'm looking at extending the maturity of the loan, because if we pay 30 million in 1 year, that's gonna eat up about 30% of the operating revenues. We're not gonna be able to make it by the end of that year. So if we can extend this maybe beyond 2 years, that's gonna help us with not only paying the current loan, but also a part of the previous or the next one. So a new borrowing resolution will be presented to the board during May.
The next few slides, they're just going over some of those major highlights, changes, just putting them into different terms for you. So this is an approximate number of positions and dollar amounts that will be decreasing. And just to be clear, right now, every contract certified teacher will have a job and placed somewhere within the district. They're Chapter 121 teachers, and they will have a position. My intention is to achieve this through attrition and reassignment. I don't guarantee everybody will have the same position they have this year, but we will be able to place people as positions open up. We've already had a hiring freeze in place at the central office for a long time. Now it's been extended to the campuses to ensure we have open positions. And so this is just to give you an idea of the types and numbers of positions. Go forward. So the major changes on the campus level is when you staff people, campuses, you staff based on a ratio. That doesn't mean classes are automatically going to change their size. There's a lot of factors to it. But when you calculate how many staff persons you assign each campus, you use ratios. And so these are the ratios we're using. The ones in parentheses are what it was this current year. And so you can see the change in those ratios.
Was
Go forward. Some other changes. This morning, I went ahead and let the campus staff know. When we decided to put one single principal in charge of all of Manor High School, when I made that decision, it made a lot of duplicate staff. We're going to look at combining those staff. And so that came out to be a savings of up to $632,000. I say up to, I think there's going to be, since you have two physical locations, there's going to be a little bit of duplication. I don't think we'll realize all that savings, but I'm still thinking around $500,000 in savings by consolidating those efforts. It also, of course, ends a lot of the scheduling conflicts. We've continually had to expend resources to try to solve between the multiple campuses. And of course, one thing that I've heard from a lot of parents is that there's a lot of inconsistency in application of rules between the campuses, and putting it all under one principal will alleviate that. We also had some changes to transportation and how we operate. My intent to move all the freshmen who are Mustangs to the 9th grade center, regardless of what program they're on. It will be at the Manor High School 9th grade center, not 9-10 anymore. That's the one on Greg Manor over here. And then all the 10th through 12th graders will be at the senior high school next complex. And we estimating that's going to reduce the shuttle buses by about half. They're going back, which will result in some savings. But you couple that with a reduction in the number of bus stops district-wide and moving up the high school start time by 30 minutes from 9:15 to 8:45. those total savings amount to $379,000 a year. And that savings comes from the reduction in overtime that our bus drivers are doing just, well, every day. So there was just a question earlier about the range that we're currently operating. We actually really aren't operating under any kind of standard range for where we put bus stops. It's been very using a program and kind of guessing, and there's been administrative requests to have a bus stop here, been very requests to have a bus stop here. We're actually going to apply some industry standards to how we apply the buses. And that's a 1/4 mile range for elementary bus stops and a 1/2 mile range for secondary. In fact, actually, the standard for high school is 1 mile for bus stops, but I decided that was one step too far. I didn't want to unintentionally reduce our attendance by not having bus stops close enough for our kids, especially in some of our more rural areas. So these are the bus stop ranges we're going to do. So our buses will actually be moving through the neighborhoods much faster because there are a lot less bus stops, which allows us to move up the school day sooner. We're meeting with the principals on Thursday to hammer out if that's going to impact any of the times of middle school and whether the elementary wants to make adjustments. Once we have those times solidified, we'll go ahead and let the community know that those times have changed. And by the way, the moving the start time up, for those of you who don't know high school operations, makes a huge deal academically because so many of our kids are leaving the last period of the day to get to their competitions. They miss almost the entire period of the day. So moving it up is going to make a big difference for those kids who aren't going to be missing classes often. Okay. Some non-changes for right now to point out. Right now, we are attempting to maintain zero costs for individual health care for our employees. So right now, our employees' individual health care comes at no cost to them. The district picks up the cost. That's one of those things we don't know about until the summer, whether the cost of health insurance changes. But right now, in our budget, we're intending to cover the individual health care costs. I don't know about family plans, but I'm talking about the individual health care. Right now, there is no increase in compensation for employees in this, except for equity adjustments. And those are adjustments that we see that where our pay scale for particular positions have come, are not commensurate with some of the other areas. Assistant principals, for example, come to mind. They'll be seeing an increase, many of them will see an increase in their salary. It's not really commensurate to the market. We're also continuing stipends for teachers who decide to and want to take on large class loads, and they're capable of taking on large class loads. That can help out some of their peers, but also could help them get some high stipends as well. Some of those stipends range $10,000 to $12,000, depending on how many students they take on. So all that's in there as well. And then I just also wanted just a word looking to the future. I really want to make it clear that it is not my intention to build back what we just have. So as new money comes in, I'm not intending just to go back and just start putting back everything we did. We have to build back a better, stronger, more efficient organization for our children. And that's my intention to do. So all I put up here is just some beginning thoughts of where I think that needs to go as we start. I do want to address elementary, 3rd and 4th grade when I can. Secondary ELA classes, for those of you who have been ELA teachers grading that many papers, even though, I mean, AI is going to start helping us, I still think there's a whole lot of grading for ELA teachers. But beyond that, we are still spending money on recruiting and developing special educators. We have a plan to help develop some of our teachers, perhaps who are placed into long-term sub positions as special educators, to help them become actual certified special educators and get them that stipend on top of that. So we have a plan for that and want to spend money. I also believe in this district with 47% emergent bilinguals, we struggle at the secondary level when students are moving in at that level. We have a nice bilingual program at elementary. We need to do better at the secondary level on working with kids who don't speak English and they're arriving. And so I definitely want to address that. And we'll continue to address emerging technology with AI implementation and spending some funds there. That helps our people work faster and more efficiently. It helps them, basically. It goes back to that, how can I simplify the mission for them and make them better at their jobs? So it doesn't feel like we're just putting more and more work, we're making some things easier as well. This list is obviously will change and grow over time, depending on what my team and we discussed. I just put it there to emphasize if the legislature somehow puts, $10 million to us, we are not just gonna bring back everything. We're gonna be very intentional about what we bring back, to ensure that we have a healthy fund balance in the future and our kids get exactly what they need. With that, I'm gonna stop for a moment, for any questions, and Don's here, our financial advisor, so if there are questions about loans, interests, and in fact, you could even answer potential questions about INS budget, which is a different budget.
I have a question on that.
So-
So first of all, when do you, I got confused when I was looking at the repayment. I thought it was repaying some of our debt, but it was more, well, it was the loan that we took. So when is the next time that you see, or would advise that we would pay off our bond? And how much do we have remaining of it? And then if we do so, when? And then once we do that, what's our bonding capacity? Got it? Sorry.
I don't have the answers to all those questions off the top of my head. For some of those questions, for example, the amount of debt that's outstanding is approximately 488 million. That debt will be paid off over time. Each year, there's a certain amount of principal that's paid off at the same time you're paying off interest. So you have some capacity that'll be becoming available as you have debt that's going to be rolling off. That's going to be occurring, I believe, in 2027. So if you were to look at just talking about passing a bond election sometime in the next year, you could schedule your first bond payment in that year. So let's say if you were to issue that debt in 2026, and that first payment would come due in 2027. So it would have less of an impact on your tax rate as your debt is paid off. For the short-term debt that was done just a few months ago, you're actually paying that off on an accelerated basis. Originally, the district had the ability to pay it off as late as the end of the fiscal year, which is June 30th. We looked at accelerating that to as early as the end of March, and then a further acceleration to late 13th of March. So with that, I believe Mr. Santiago presented there's around $100,000 of interest savings by paying that off early. So I think all the things that you're doing on the INS side is not so much what you've really been looking at this evening. Really, this evening's been more focused on the O&M, we'll call operations and management of the district. So this side of the O&M side focuses more on the general fund, and the rating agencies in particular are looking at not just Manor ISD, but all Texas ISDs and other ISDs around the country. And this.
So with the rating system, and I do apologize,
Yeah.
I'm gonna lose it if I don't address it right now.
Please.
So there's a lot of school districts in the whole state of Texas that are now going out for loans because of all this, everything that we have going on. This would be our second year. So then, and I've asked in the past, but I want to hear it from you too. How would that impact us in our ratings? And because there's already a track record across the whole state of Texas of school districts doing the same, do you anticipate seeing a modified grading rubric system with a new rating, or because of everybody, a lot of school districts are going through that? So I'm hoping there's a good upcoming later on, because we're not the only ones.
I'm going to start with maybe your last part of your question, which is kind of what we call a recalibration on the ratings process. The school districts, by the three major rating agencies, which are Standard & Poor's, Moody's Investor Service, and Fitch Ratings, the three of them have actually taken a pretty hard stance, and unfortunately are really not being flexible and not looking to do any kind of recalibration with respect to school district ratings in particular. And I say that because we're actually going through these types of discussions with several other clients, school districts, as well as other type of governmental entities. And the challenge that they're faced with is that they want to make sure that they hold everyone to the same standard with respect to tax exempt entities. And for school districts, one of the major ones, and Dr. Somani and Santiago pointed it out, was when you were looking at the amount of fund balance that's available as a percentage of the budget. And Fitch is one of those that takes a very hard line, as does S&P. What percentage? If you are at 20% of expenditures, then you're probably going to be in pretty good shape. You drop below 20%, you're going to notch you off by a downgrade from, let's say, a AA plus to a AA. And then if you drop below that to less than 10%, another notch. They start notching pretty quickly based on those percentages. And they understand what's happening. And they understand that a lot of this is projections that were done pre-COVID, during COVID, and then past COVID, with the expectation that students were going to be returning in the same numbers that you had pre-COVID. And a lot of those projections all over the country, not just in Texas, the numbers just haven't been coming back. And so they also understand Texas legislative process, and it's the funding's over a biennium. So they, I think, are anticipating that you're going to have probably at least a 2-year impact because of the biennium funding cycle. I think the thing that they're going to be looking at, and this is one of the things that the rating agencies are very, let's say, blunt about. And what they say is, what are the things within your control and the things that are not in your control? So you don't control the economy, you don't control the number of students that are in attendance, but what you do control are the budget, the management, and the financial decisions that you're making. And so those things that are within your control, those variables, are the ones that they are weighting and more heavily in terms of the rating process. So if they weight the financial aspects, the management, those types of things, those things that are within your control in a greater way, then you can expect that if you don't make improvements in terms of the budget and increasing the fund balance, then that's where they will tend to do downgrades. And we're seeing that right now. We're seeing a couple of districts that are probably going to be finding out this week that they're going to be downgraded simply because they just didn't hit these particular watermarks. And to regain those typically takes about 3-5 years. So that's why I think your plan is the appropriate point of attack, because you can look to say, okay, here are the changes that we're making and the improvements that we're making. Here's what we expect from you.
I hear Dr. Thomas out there. We're gonna send Don home if we have no more known questions.
I do.
Are we gonna get a?
I have two. A question and a statement.
Go ahead, Mary.
Okay, Dr. Thomas, you can go ahead. I know you were gonna make a statement. And if we have no further questions, we can go ahead and have you make a statement, Dr. Thomas.
Okay, I just have two announcements actually. Back when I went to El Paso, one of the things with leadership, school board leadership, we had entered into a lot of announcements and things having to do with our students and our parents and our rating. And we entered all of that information in. And as a result, that was back in August. And we entered, and at the time, I talked to the board or informed the board that we were contingent upon having acknowledgement of all of the work that our students, our staff had done over time. So it resulted in the Fortuna award that really rests in all of the acclimates that our students and our staff had done. So as a result, that was since August of last year. And since then, um, we talked about the Dubai thing. Since then, well, our district was awarded with that award for um, a woman of the year for uh, everything that was um, in the United States, in the western part of the United States. And I wanted to share that because I've done it with, smaller groups. But I'm really, really proud and really, really appreciate each and every one of you for all of that you continue to do as we moved on. But I want to share that real briefly. And I'll send it to Laura. I think I had the conversation with Dr. Samani, but it did come in and it looks like this.
Way to go, Dr. Thomas.
And then at the bottom, it does share and talk about our district and all the things that we have been awarded is I received it on behalf of the district of businesswoman of the year. And it does, talk about Manor and all the things that we've done along with our students and our staff. So when I come up there in the next couple of days, I will share and bring it to Dr. Simone to share wherever, because it is something that our district worked really hard for. And it's not something that's taken lightly because everybody doesn't get a chance to get it. And so just want to show it.
I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Actually,
I had a question.
Yes.
You done there?
Oh, I have one more announcement unless you got one about this.
No.
We're gonna see it when you bring it, Dr. Thomas. We wanna
Yeah.
see it. Thank you.
I'm gonna bring it either tomorrow or Wednesday. The other thing is that in Travis County, we have had every year, this is the time of the year and phase in getting our graduates who are eligible to prepare them for graduation. The challenge is that we're going into spring break. And last week, we had the lunch and learn and invited all of the staff from the district. And sadly, we didn't have any representative from Manor. The other part of it is the deadline or the timeline is upon us in order to get all of the process done for graduation, you know, um, for our students. So I am requesting that we get that data in. The court date is Wednesday. And so we need those representatives from our district, so we won't be left out of that final piece. So if Dr. Samani, you can encourage that there will be representative from each of the areas, then we can get that done.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Dr. Sharmani? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
My question was, are we gonna have a similar presentation on INS funding?
We can do a similar presentation. It'll be a lot less complex, I could say. And you actually have two budgets. You actually have the food service budget is separate and your INS budget. So I'll work with the board pros about tacking on somewhere where you can get a preview of that as well. this is always gonna be the largest, more complex one.
Because I'm new to the board, so could you tell me who you are and who you work for?
Yes, I'm sorry. My name is Don Gonzalez. I'm with Estrada Hinojosa, and we've had the honor of being the financial advisor to Manor ISD. Represent a number of school districts, cities, counties, and various other issuers all around the country. But we're headquartered here in Texas. And for me, I started out many years ago in public accounting. I'm also a CPA. And then, believe it or not, worked in the Texas School Performance Review under State Controller John Sharp then at the time. And then got into public finance investment banking 33 years ago. So that's my third career.
I understand. Y'all are, you're headquartered where?
Headquartered in Dallas.
Dallas.
And we have Austin office, San Antonio, Houston, and Rio Grande Valley. And other offices around the country as well.
Just, like you came here from wherever you live and you didn't really get a chance to present, so I was wondering how that worked.
And when you have the interest in sinking fund budget, happy to come back and get into more detail with respect to bond capacity and things of that nature. One thing that I would suggest is that we, get your latest property values, which I know April, right? So maybe around that time, may make a little more sense to have a better number to be able to look at. We can work off some preliminary numbers before then. Have something before that.
Yeah, the last time that y'all looked up, we're sitting at $325 million in bonding capacity. Of course, those numbers will have changed since it's been several months.
Well, thanks, Lord.
Thank you.
But thank you for all the work that you're doing, because this does make a difference when, even when you're doing the short-term financings, because the lenders will say, okay, you were able to pay off this note early. So that's a good sign. And then, so when we come back a following year, they'll be taking those types of things into consideration.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, I guess it's 7:30, and if we don't have, are we done with the presentation?
Yes, ma'am. So,
Is everybody good to go? Any other additional questions? All right, I don't see that.
okay, so just policy BED regulations. It doesn't require a vote, it's just a discussion. You have I provided you these through Big Rocks. The one that had the yellow on it, if you have that on the top page, that is just a simple script that I used in some of the citations from the dais. The next pages are BED local, that's your actual local policy. If you want to reference it. What's new is where it starts, where it says members of the public. Can you go forward? And really, I have not given this, as I said earlier, I've not had attorneys even look at it to make sure this is okay. But all I'm trying to do is just to establish what this board would like as far as the quorum goes into the audience as things go. And so all I did here is I just pulled out 5 things I thought you might want to know and talk about. Obviously, there's a whole long 2-page list of things, but I just pulled out some of those things that I thought were up for discussion. Or if you want to leave it to me, I can go forward, however you would like to approach this.
Is it consistent with other school districts?
Fairly consistent. Everyone has a little bit of differences and nuances to it. And I know, Ms. Browser, you and I talked a little bit about the signs, and I went back and looked. It actually is no signs that disturb the peace. So that's what the actual wording was that I borrowed. And so I think that that's probably there because the lawyers won't allow you to have no signs. Only if they somehow disturb the peace.
Have these points been an issue?
No, I'm
Okay.
just anticipating anything that I thought might come up so that we can be proactive.
Yeah,
rather than
something
reactive.
proactive.
my wondering around food being allowed simply comes from the fact that I know a lot of families bring their young kids with them when they come to board meetings. And so, I mean, if I wasn't a board member, I'd be sneaking snacks in for my own kids, so I'm just saying, just saying that out loud, that just being cognizant of how we, make space for our families to be able to attend and still take care of their children.
Yeah, we don't have to draw a hard line.
Yeah.
And you can always just use it, just cross it out and address it if we ever need to.
If it becomes a bigger issue, I guess.
Yeah, let's somehow put that in right discretion on. that.
Medical conditions.
Okay, that shall be done. If there's not any commentary, I will make that one change. I'll send it off to our attorneys to review so they can give me feedback. And once they're reviewed by them, I'll send you the final copy. And at that point, we'll make it, our rule. Regulations can be changed at any point. There are regulations, I control by changing them, but when it has to do with a policy that is controlled, the policies basically, I always try to refer to you because it's your board and people's. Okay, and before. Next one is BBG local. You have in front of you is just some regulations, and I was realizing that number 2 really doesn't apply because it's really based on how much in the budget is allows you for nights you want. I have 2 attachments, one that has a bunch of red crossouts. That is the TASB recommended policy. And then the next page is our current policy. There are not, I would say, substantive changes between the 2. I think the main piece to know is moving forward. I was talking to the attorney to make sure that we were in compliance with our own policy. Is that we need to make sure that we collect receipts from board members for expenses, whether there's a per diem or not. I think that's the main change in the regulations that we're going to have. If the trustees later on want to go with the TASB policy, we can always put it on the agenda. In my view of it, it just makes it cleaner. There's not really a big substantial change between TASB's and ours, so I'm not really saying we need to go do it. Unless there's strong feelings, I might include it in a later package with a whole bunch of policies at once, right?
We could just clean it up, maybe, that's it, just make it cleaner. I remember 2 what you want to do.
Yeah,
Or just, or use
I'll
number,
I plan on getting rid of number 2 because it doesn't make sense based on, we provide trustees with a travel budget. And there's no reason to say how many nights, it really just depends.
as long as you're within your budget.
And I think we're on to action items.
All right. Yes, we are indeed, and, for action items number 8.1, do I have a motion, for 8.1, consideration and adoption of the 25-26 and 26-27 school calendar?
We have discussion after the motion.
Yeah, or you could do, yeah.
Move that we approve 8.1, I move that the board approves 2026 and 27 academic calendar as presented.
I have a motion by trustee Patterson to approve 8.1 as presented. Do I have a second? I have a second by trustee Howard,
And President, if I might,
and then we'll discussion.
just a reminder of what you're voting on. The calendar in question has added Veterans Day as the day off on the day of Veterans Day, which is a Tuesday for 25-26 and a Wednesday 26-27. And it makes the start date of future contracts the last day in July. So I just want to let you know what you're voting on. So if there's any discussion.
Well, that's what I want to know. Yeah, and Veterans Day and that. I guess the only discussion for me might be, what do people think about just having it on the Monday of the week of Veterans Day? 10th, I guess, of next year.
2 days before.
And then the 9th. 2 years.
So what, I guess that's a question you have, and then my question is, what's the impact for admin staff to move things around?
The impact for us is negligible. It's not a problem to move it to any of those days, as long as we know far in advance. This is way far in advance, which is
Yeah.
nice that we're ahead of things. So for us, either way works. We can do it on the Monday. The Monday, I'll tell you, it's a little more natural because people get a 3-day weekend, employees and staff. But if you really want it on the Veterans Day, I've done it where it's actually on the day in the middle of the week as well. I don't know what tools you have.
Yeah, I think honoring our veterans that are serving in the district is important, as well as our military attached students. I wouldn't be opposed if the board is interested in moving that direction to move it to a Monday. However, that does limit the veterans' ability to attend any events that are actually happening on that day. And I think in honoring them and their service to our country, as well as our district, we'd be better suited to have it on Veterans Day.
Yeah, I don't have a hard position to go.
Any other comments?
No, thank you, Trustee Rodriguez Barnett. I like that context. It really helps me to better understand the impact of the choice.
So,
If you vote yes on the current, it will be on the actual Veterans Day. This day.
okay, so I have if there's no additional comments or discussions, we already have a first and a
Second by
second.
Mrs. Howard.
And then I can already entertain the vote. All those in favor?
Dr. Thomas, are you in favor?
Yes, I am.
7-0. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to get me ready to eat.
Okay, we're almost done. Okay. Action item 8.2. Do I have a motion for consideration and adoption of a resolution to pay off the loan?
I move that the board approves the resolution authorizing the defeasance of certain portions of the district's currently outstanding obligations and other matters related thereto as submitted.
I have a motion by
I'll second.
trustee Howard. I have a second by trustee Martinez. There's no discussion. I can have a vote. All those in favor? Yay. Dr. Thomas? Yay. 7-0. All right. I guess I will call the next confirmation of the next regular board meeting is March 25th, which is a Tuesday. So other than that, I think we're pretty much done. So if there's no further discussion or anything, I can entertain a motion to adjourn. I got one from trustee Martinez. Do I have a second from trustee Rodriguez Barnett? All those in favor? Aye. And aye from Dr. Thomas. Yay.
Yep.
7-0. We adjourn at 7:40 p.m. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Great work.